Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar to help you get ready for the exam. We're still waiting for a couple more people to join, but I think we've got a good number of you who are up and ready to get started, so we'll get on our way. So I'm hoping that you can all see the screen that has our deck, our slides that we'll work through this morning. And I hope that maybe I'm there as a little picture on your screen saying good morning to all of you. Now, what we're going to do as we get started is we're going to, first of all, spend some time just looking at this technology and making sure that we're all as comfortable as we can be and have a good way of working together using this technology. So Robert from ICCS, who's located in Toronto, one of the cities you'll be visiting soon, he is staying up very late with us. It's just after midnight for Robert, and he's going to be supporting us throughout the webinar and keeping the technology working for us. So Robert's a very important part of our time together today. I'm going to turn things over to Robert now so that he can tell us how best to make the webinar technology work really well for us during our time together today. So Robert, again, thank you very much for helping to get this all set up and for supporting us even though it's really late at night for you. So can you walk us through some tips on how to use this, please?
Good morning, everybody. I'd just like to bring your attention, and most of you have actually figured out how to use the chat feature. That's how you'll be able to communicate with Faye and send in your questions to Faye that you may have throughout the webinar. Some of your microphones may not be working, so this would be the best way to go ahead and submit your questions. And I do see that almost everyone has joined the audio conference to be able to hear Faye. And Jabbar, I don't believe you have joined yet, so I will work with you to troubleshoot your audio troubles. But other than that, we are taking a recording of this webinar session, and you'll notice on the left-hand side is the slide deck that Faye will be speaking to. You'll notice Faye's web feed as well, webcam feed as well. And that is basically the entire WebEx environment that you'll need in order to take part in this webinar. If there are any questions, please feel free to direct it to me, the host, and I'll be happy to respond to your questions. Back over to you, Faye.
Thanks, Robert. So I'm hoping everyone has found that chat box. It's toward the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. There's a box, and you can just type your questions in it. Robert, will the raise hand button work?
On the participants panel, so everyone can take a look at their participants panel, and there should be a raise hand button as well, and that should work. And that will alert you, Faye, if anyone's raising their hand.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Robert. Yeah, so if there's a little button that looks like a hand, it just looks like a hand up flat, and if you click on that button, then that should alert me that you have a question or a comment, and that might be something that will be useful for us as we move along through our time together today. So I have to start by saying that it feels a little odd to be talking to you through my computer after having enjoyed so many days together with you in person. I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you again when you do come to Canada. So what we're going to do is, because we don't have many people whose microphones are on, please feel free to use the chat box to send your greetings. Many of you have already done that, but we won't be able to go around and actually greet everyone in person, given the way that the technology is working for us today. So given all of that, I'm going to move right into the material that we're covering today and give you a sense of what it is we need to work through. So we have three objectives today. The first one is to talk about the exam and just to go through what the exam includes and to look at what you might need to do to be well prepared for it. Our second objective is for me to give you a number of tips for taking the exam. Just some things that I think might help you to come into the exam feeling a little bit more prepared, a little bit more ready to write the exam and to succeed on it. And then the third part of our time together will be for an opportunity for you to raise questions from your self-studies. So I'm just pausing for a moment. Okay, there's a question from Hamid in the chat box, and I'll ask Robert to respond to that question, if you would, please. Okay, great. So these are the three things we're going to do today so that we can help you get as ready as possible for the exam. So let's jump right into it. So we're going to start by looking at what are the requirements of the exam. So the main requirement, as we talked about when we were together in the training, is that you need to be covering all 6 sections of the body of knowledge. So chapters 1 through 6, that are all the topics that we talked about when we were together at the Shangri-La. But in addition to that, at the end of each chapter, you will notice that there are 2 categories of additional readings. One of them are the core references, and the other are the supplemental references. The core references are those things that you do have to have mastered for the exam. The supplemental references are there just for you if you want additional information, additional resources to look things up, and that kind of thing. So the core references, when you go online to the wiki that we talked about when we were together in Abu Dhabi, that's where you'll find all of the core references. And just a reminder that when you go there, you do not need to log in on that page. You already have gotten through all of the security through having access to that web address. That's not a public website that anyone can get to by searching or Googling for it. You do have to enter that specific address that you received when you got your body of knowledge in order to get to those core references. If anyone is having difficulty getting to the core references, please do be in touch with ICCS and let them know so that they can make sure that you have access to all of them. But I did check it several times when I was in Abu Dhabi, and I was able to access them. So I'm pretty confident that you'll be able to get into that material. So what do you need to have mastered in those 6 chapters? Well, you have to have what we would call a working knowledge, a working understanding of those 6 sections. What does that mean? It means you have to know more than just the ability to recall the information by rote. You have to actually be able to think about the information and apply it. So you'll find in the exam many questions that will ask you to think about different situations and to think about the material that we've covered and to find ways to bring that material into real-life service management challenges and issues. So it's there will be a few questions where you do just have straight recall, but those are the smaller number of questions. The bigger number of questions are the ones that actually ask you to think about and apply the information. Now, there's more information about the standards. The standards are a description of the level of knowledge that candidates who pass the exam will have. In any day now, you will be receiving from GSEC a publication that is the CSM Basic Exam Study Guide. And that study guide will review a lot of the material we're going over today, but it will also present for you all of the specific standards. So the standards for certification, again, those are the statements that say these are the kinds of things we think people who are going to be certified will know. The kinds of things that you're required to be really good at in order to be certified. So when you get your exam study guide, please do read through it and have a look at those standards so that you have a really clear idea as to what the exam is going to be focused on and the level of the examination questions. Now, to pass the exam, you have to receive a score of at least 80%. And I realize that's a pretty high standard. People who've taken the exam that I've spoken to have told me that it's a tough exam. They said it's fair, but it's pretty tough. So their sense was that they truly did have to know all of the material in the first 6 sections of the body of knowledge in order to be successful. Now, there are 6 sections, but the exam doesn't cover them equally. There are 2 sections of the body of knowledge, the section on the human resource aspects of service management and the section on service improvement, that are both a little longer than the other sections. I'm just going to grab my body of knowledge here for a moment and look at the table of contents and remind myself of the number of pages. Yeah, when you look at the human resource aspects of service, it's about a third again longer than some of the other sections. Same with the service improvement section. And that's why both of those have more questions, about twice as many questions on the exam come from those 2 sections. So that's just another one of those little tips that to get really ready, it'll be good for you to spend time on all 6 sections, but spend a little more on those 2. And it is necessary for you to study. As much as we covered in 5 days, we didn't cover it all. So there's a lot of material in the body of knowledge that is additional stuff to the classroom learnings. And you'll need to be really comfortable and familiar with all of it to do really well on the exam. My sense is that if you try to plan between 1 and 2 hours as a minimum of study time every day between now and the exam, that would probably be about right. So we're going to talk about taking the exam. And before I get into that, I just want to pause. I'm going to pause for about 3 or 4 minutes. And I'd invite you to, in the chat box, send me questions. Are there any questions that you have about the exam? And if you let me know those questions now, then I can make sure that as I'm going through the material, I can cover all of your questions. So I'm just going to wait for a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. Use your chat box to send me any questions that you have. As you've been thinking about the exam and wondering about what it's going to be like, just send those questions along. Okay, I'm going to carry on. I've had a question asking if it's multiple choice questions or not, which is a great question because we do want to spend some time talking about the kind of questions. It's not all multiple choice. There are some multiple choice, and I'll be able to give you some information as we go forward, exactly outlining how many multiple choice, how many other kinds of questions there are. So any other questions before we carry on? Okay, another question about what is the structure of the exam and how long is it? Another great question, because we do want to look at that. Okay, let's get into all of these questions. So before I answer those specific questions, let's just do a little bit of background. Sorry, there's one more question. Is there an online demo or example of the exam? And yes, there is. So I'll also be able to give you information on how to link to that practice exam. And I'll also tell you about when and how best to use that so that you really take full advantage of it. Okay, so we've already said that the exam asks you to do more than just recall facts. You have to be able to demonstrate that you can apply or use the information. You have to be able to pull out the concepts, the models, the findings in the box, and apply them. A lot of the questions ask you to put yourself in the position of a service manager with a challenge, or maybe a service manager who's been asked to help another service manager who has a problem, and use the information in the box to help address any problems or issues they may be having. So first of all, yes, there are multiple choice items. That's one of the two kinds of questions that are in the exam. And in fact, 40% of the total exam will be made up of multiple choice items. And there will be 40 of those multiple choice items. Each multiple choice item will give you a statement or a question, and then a list of options, and your job is to pick the answer that's the best answer. So let's look at the example that's up on the screen. This question says, according to the public sector service value chain model, a decline in employee engagement will directly impact citizen or client, and then it gives you 4 options: loyalty, compliance, satisfaction, or confidence. And at the bottom of your slide, I'm showing you the model. Now that's because I'm being nice. It's early in the morning. But when you're writing the exam, the model won't be there. You'll have to know what is in that model to be able to answer that question. So what's the best way to go about answering a multiple choice question? Well, let me tell you what I like to do. And there's lots of other strategies, and if anyone has other suggestions that they'd like to write into the chat box, please do. But what I've always done is when I'm taking an exam and I'm faced with a multiple choice question, is the first thing I do is I read what's at the beginning of it, which is, in this instance, is a statement. It might be written as a statement, or it might be written as a question. But I would read just that first part. According to the public sector service value chain model, a decline in employee engagement will directly impact citizen or client. And then I stop. And at that point, I don't look at any of the answers. I stop and I just think about it. And I try to come up with what I think is the best answer. And sometimes I'll even, on just a piece of paper off to the side, I'll write down what I think that answer is. And then I'll look at the list, and I'll go through the list, each one of them, and see if the answer I thought was the correct answer is there. I don't automatically go check that answer. I pause, and I always spend some time thinking about each of the other alternatives that I've been given, because maybe there's an even better answer than the one I first of all came up with. So I go through the list, and I look at each one, and I first of all try to figure out which ones are really obviously wrong. Well, in this list of 4, the first one that's obviously wrong is loyalty, because that word, loyalty, isn't something that we talked about in terms of the service value chain model at all. So I would know straight off that loyalty isn't a possible example, or a possible answer, I should say. Same for compliance. We talked about compliance. But we talked about that when we talked about different kinds of service recipients. It didn't come into the service value chain. So I would know that both A and B are answers that I could just say, no, not those ones. So now I'm left with satisfaction, which is the answer that I thought was correct at the beginning. and confidence. Now that's a little tricky because confidence is in the service value chain model, so is satisfaction. But in this case, when I go back to the question and I look at it, the word directly is underlined. That's a really important hint. Whenever anything is underlined, pay extra attention to that word. So in this question, they're saying a decline in employee engagement will directly impact something. Well, the direct impact is from the first link to the second link. It's an indirect impact to get to the third link. So that's what makes satisfaction the correct answer in this example. Now, if anyone has any questions about this one and doesn't see how I got to C being the correct answer, please do type a note in the chat box so that I can come back to it. But again, just to summarize, there are 40 multiple choice questions. Each of them will give you either 4 or 5 answers, and your job is to pick the one that's the very, very best. So out of all of the answers, what is the very, very best one? And you're going to spend a little bit of time really focusing on any words that are underlined. And yes, you are going to see underlined words in the exam. And some of them are both underlined and in capital letters, just to make them really stand out. So you will, in the exam, be helped to be guided to figure out how best to answer these items. Does anyone else have any other questions? It was a great question. Thanks for asking if you would see underlined items in underlined words in the exam or not. Okay. Sorry, I look away from time to time. I'm just trying to read the chat box. Okay. And another question has asked is the box is what I've been referring to is what you received in the training course. Has it been updated? Do you have to go online? No, the exam is based exactly on this hard copy book that you all received. And so it's the 6 chapters in that, but you do have to go online for all of the core reference materials. And the exam will be written as paper and pencil. You will not be doing it on a computer. So you'll have the paper there and the opportunity to write your exam right on the paper. And you'll also have some additional paper provided to you if you want to make any notes. So as we look at the example that we just looked at here on the screen, if this question came up, I might on the pieces of paper I've been given for my note-taking, I might just do a quick sketch of the service value chain, just to remind myself of what that model looked like, so that as I'm answering the question, I can double-check my answer against that question, that model. And I'm just trying to read the chat box again. Okay, I think there aren't any more questions about the multiple choice question, but if there are, if you think of anything else, just type it in at any time. I'll just keep pausing from time to time to read what's coming in on the chat since you can't actually talk to me. A little strange, I must admit, to be here and for me to be able to talk to you and you not to be able to talk to me. So we'll make this work as best we can today. So now let's talk about the second type of exam item. And I'm going to give you tons and tons of tips on how to handle these items a little later in our webinar. But I just want to, at this point, introduce you to both types of the exam questions. So the second kind of question are the open-ended questions. By open-ended, I mean these are questions where you will write your answers in your own words. And 60% of your mark will be coming from these questions where you write out the answer. And some of these are going to ask you for just a few sentences or a few words. Some will invite you to respond in point form or bullets. And by that I mean you can just make lists that are phrases and key ideas. Those bullets or point form does not have to be written out as a full sentence. And other items will invite you to answer using a more of an essay format. And there you would use complete sentences, writing as you might say for a publication, a little article kind of thing. So you'll be asked to answer each question in different ways. And the question will very clearly tell you what kind of answer it's looking for. Not only that, the question will give you a certain amount of space to respond. So you'll be able to see how much is expected. Is it just a little tiny bit, or is it a long bit that you're being asked to provide? Now, a lot of these open-ended questions, as I mentioned earlier, will give you a case scenario. So they'll say, okay, here's a situation. You've been asked to take on managing this particular service, and here's what's going on. And then your job is to respond to the questions about what you might do in that environment. That's just an example of the kind of question that you could get. So you'll have to really apply, you'll have to pull all different kinds of ideas and knowledge from across the block and bring it into those written answers. And as I said, some questions are going to be open-ended questions will ask you to write a lot more than others. There will be 9 open-ended questions. I know on this slide it says the number of items can vary, and that's true. But for the exam that you'll get 9 open-ended questions. And each open-ended question will tell you approximately how many minutes to spend on that question, because some have more marks than others. Each of them will also tell you how many marks that particular question is worth. So that's a quick overview of what the open-ended items are like. If you have any questions on those, please type them in. But again, I'm going to give you lots more tips on how to write those, answer those questions as we go along. So, oh, perfect. Someone just typed in, how long is the test? Great, because that's my next slide. The next slide is, the test is 3 hours long. So here's my recommendation to you. With 3 hours, 40% of your mark will come from the multiple choice questions. So give the multiple choice questions 40% of your time. And 60% of your mark will come from the open-ended questions. So give those 60% of your time. So I've done the math for you. And in fact, even right in the exam, it will give you these numbers as suggestions. It will suggest that you spend 72 minutes on the multiple choice questions and 108 minutes on the open-ended items. And that will bring you exactly up to your 3 hours. So the 3-hour block of time is set. GSEC will tell you where you need to be on October 29th. October 29th is your exam date. So GSEC will tell you where you need to be and what time the exam will start. The exam will start exactly at that time. If you arrive late, you will not be given any extra time. And that might be a little bit of a challenge because I know when we were starting our training days, there was a bit of a tendency for some people to come rolling in a little later than our start time. You can do that for the exam, but then you're only going to be hurting yourself. Because if you come in 15 minutes late, then you only have 2 hours and 45 minutes to write the exam. It's not 3 hours from when you arrive. It's 3 hours from the start time. So make sure you get there early. My advice is plan to be there 15 minutes before the exam starts. The last thing you want to do is come rushing in, being all hot for being outside and being panicked from being late. You never know in Abu Dhabi what the traffic will be like. You never know what parking will be like. So give yourself lots and lots of time. Get there early so that when you start the exam, you're feeling comfortable and you're not feeling any extra stress from being late. Before you write the exam, each person will have to show some government ID just to verify who's taking the exam. It's not that we don't trust you, it's just there are all these goofy stories that you hear on the internet about people taking the exam who aren't the actual exam candidates. So one of the things we do with the certification for everybody is we make sure that their ID is checked before they write the exam. You will also, before you write, be asked to sign an examination log. And by signing that log, you're saying that you're not going to tell anybody else what's in the exam. Some items do get used another time. And so it's really important that you don't tell other people what the exam items were like. No one's told you what the exam items are. And in fairness, we want anybody else who may be certified down the road, we want them to have the same exam experience as you're having. So we'd ask that you please hold all of the exam questions in confidence and not discuss them with anyone. Now, the exam is closed book. What does that mean? It means you cannot look at the box or any notes or anything else during the exam. You're not allowed to use a computer. You're not allowed to use your cell phone or smartphone to look anything else. If you do need to leave the room, you won't be able to look up anything when you're out of the room either. And you're not allowed to bring anything into the exam room other than just personal items. But do make sure you bring things that will make you comfortable. You're going to be writing for 3 hours. Most of us aren't used to writing for 3 hours anymore. So bring a pen that's really comfortable. Don't just bring one. Bring 2 or 3 just in case. Or bring a pencil, whatever you're comfortable with. You might want to bring a bottle of water. You might want to bring a few candies to give yourself some sugar high as you go along. So bring those personal things that will make you comfortable while you're writing the exam. I do always bring something to drink and some candies or some sort of little snack into any exam that I write, just to make sure that I do give myself an energy boost as I'm going along. But please don't bring something that's going to make a lot of noise, like a bag of crisps that you have to rip open. Well, maybe you call them potato chips. I'm not sure if you call them crisps or potato chips in Abu Dhabi, but you know, something that's really loud with lots of rattling on the packaging and crunchy food would not be a good choice. But bringing something that you can eat would be great. Maybe some of those terrific dates that you have there. I'm still really enjoying all the dates that came home with me from Abu Dhabi. So during the exam, there will be a proctor. Now, proctor is the label we give to the person who is running the exam, the overseer of the exam. And so once everyone is ready to start, once the time of the exam start time is reached, the proctor will launch right on time, and will start by reading some instructions out to you to make it really clear as to what you need to do. So that will be things like you have to put your name and date on the front of the cover and that kind of thing. Throughout the exam, the proctor will also remind you of the time. I would encourage you to also bring a watch or a little clock just to make sure that you can be really carefully watching the time throughout the exam. Now remember, you're not going to be allowed to use a cell phone. And I know that I'm kind of old-fashioned. I still wear a watch. But I think that I'm starting to be a dying breed. I think a lot of people have stopped wearing watches in favor of carrying a cell phone and checking the time on the cell phone. But you're not going to have access to your cell phone. So bring a little clock or a watch into the exam. During the exam, the proctor will come around and watch what's going on as the test is being taken, and will be there to help you follow the directions. The proctor will be able to answer basic questions about the exam, but they are not going to be able to give you any content for the exam. And so a great question was just asked. It was, if we have difficulties in understanding a word used in the exam, what will happen? Now that's difficult because some of the words, the definition of the word is part of what's being tested. So think of that model of the 6 C's. And we had customers, clients, claimants, compliers, and so on across that set of 6 C's. Now, if you were to ask for a definition of one of those words, say you asked for a definition of the word complier or the word compliance, it wouldn't be fair for the proctor to answer that question because that's some of the knowledge you're expected to know going into the exam. So the proctor is going to be there to help clarify the instructions, but that's as much as they'll be able to do. Now, the people who are marking the exam will know that English is not your first language. And so they'll be careful and be mindful of that. And the exam was reviewed to make sure that it would be, that the wording of the questions would work as well as possible for you. So the wording of the questions that you are going to get is not the same as the wording of the questions that are used in Canada. You're getting the same questions, but the wording has been reviewed to make sure it is as clear and as direct as possible, and to take out words that were too Canadian. For example, in Canada, we talk about ministries, and you talk about entities. So in the exam, it's going to use entities. So an effort has been made to make the language in the exam as friendly for you as possible. Spelling is not going to be an issue as long as the people marking the exam can understand what you intend. So don't worry about getting every word spelled absolutely correctly. I do have a confession for you. When I was in elementary school, the one subject that I failed all the time was spelling. So you certainly have lots and lots of sympathy here when it comes to the question of spelling. I've come to rely on spell check really heavily, and I know what it's like when you're asked now to write without the opportunity to use spell check. So the markers will not be taking any marks off for words that are incorrectly spelled. What you do have to be careful about is that what you write is close enough that the markers can figure out what you're trying to say. So if you're not clear about how to spell one word, make sure you add enough other words to make the point really clear, to make your intent really clear for the markers. And at the end of the 3 hours, the proctor will call time, and you'll just have to stop. I don't know if you watch any of these cooking shows. They're really popular here. But in some of the cooking shows, like MasterChef, an American show, they are timed when they're cooking. And at the end of the cooking, when the time bell goes, everybody puts their hands up in the air to show that they're not doing any more cooking. So it's kind of like that. At the end of the 3 hours, the proctor will call time, and you'll just have to stop writing wherever you are. And at that point, your examination booklets, any answer sheets, as well as any rough notes that you may have made during the exam, all of that material will be collected up. So you will walk out of that room with exactly the same things that you walked into it with. And then, after that, you can go out and enjoy a nice cup of tea and relax because your work is done. Then the work of the markers begins. And the markers, after they've marked the exams, they will be giving each individual a score out of 100. And again, just a reminder that the pass level is 80 out of 100. You will not get to see your marked exam, but if you are wondering about your performance on the exam, you can be in touch with ICCS and talk to them about your results. People who do not get the 80%, you will have an opportunity to write the exam again while you're in Canada. And unlike some things in life, I know if you go to court, you get to appeal, but with the ICCS exam, there's no appeal. So you get your mark, and the mark is what the mark is. And I've just been asked, when will you get the mark? Well, you probably won't get it until you're in Canada. Excuse me. In fact, I'm sure you won't get it until you're in Canada. Excuse me. So here's what's happening. You're writing the exam on October 29th. And then you're going to be arriving in Canada on November 1st. And we are starting our meetings with you on November the 3rd. So the exams will have to be couriered from Abu Dhabi, excuse me, to Canada and marked. So there isn't much time for the markers. They are going to be very, very busy getting the exam marked in between. So you will be getting your mark when you're in Canada. There's just not any time for you to get it ahead of that. We had originally planned to have the exam written earlier, but with the celebration of Eid and the number of people who were going to be traveling, the exam date got moved. And so the exam is now happening later than we had anticipated. When we set the date for the study tour, we anticipated the exam was going to be written earlier, in which case you would have received your mark before you left for Canada. But the way things stand right now, just with the timing, you'll have to get that mark once you're in Canada. So that's an overview of the exam. I now want to go into offering you some tips. And these tips are the kinds of things that are in the study guide. I wrote the study guide. So these are more or less the same things that are in the study guide. They're the tips. I've taken goodness knows how many exams over the years. And these are the tips that I've used over the years to help me be successful in exams. And they're things that I hope will help you. But before I go on to that, I'd like to pause and just give you an opportunity to see if there are any more questions you have about writing the exam. So I'm just going to wait and you can type in any questions that you have over the next couple of minutes. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I'm just going to carry on. So here are my tips. The first thing is to be really prepared. It just can't be said enough that self-study is so important. Read the book, read all of the core references, review all of the slides. Remember that the slides from the training included a lot more slides in each of those handouts than we were able to cover each day. So you will have a lot more material in the slides that can help you study. So go through all of that. And I've just been asked a question about providing a dictionary during the exam. That's a really great question. And I will take that question forward to ICCS. It's not a question I've heard before. And ICCS is the organization that sets all the rules around the exam. So I'm going to just pause for a moment and write this down, since it's already 10 o'clock at night. And to be honest, I'm still kind of a little jet lagged after trying to adjust my 11-hour time difference from having been in Abu Dhabi so recently. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and make a note to myself so I don't forget to ask ICCS about making a dictionary available. Okay, I will ask ICCS to get back to everybody with an answer to whether or not we can have a dictionary available for you in the exam room. Okay, so tip number 1 is be prepared. Study, 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 and study some more. The second tip is do complete the practice exam. Now, when you get the study guide is going to have pages that will review all of the things that we're talking about this morning. But it will also include one practice exam, but just one. So don't go and have a look at that straight away. What I would suggest is that you save that exam until you've done a lot of your study. And when you've done a lot of your study, then take that practice exam so that you can use it as a bit of a test for yourself to see how prepared you are. And then based on your performance on that, you'll have a sense as to how ready you are and what areas you need to do some additional study in. So the practice exam is a little different than the full exam. So the practice exam has 20 multiple choice questions, and I mentioned earlier the full exam has 40. So time yourself, because again, managing your time during the exam will be one of your biggest challenges. So when you do the practice exam, set it up like you're actually doing the exam and give yourself exactly 36 minutes and see what it's like to get through the 20 multiple choice questions in 36 minutes. And then when you go on to the open-ended questions, those open-ended questions total 115 minutes, which is pretty close. The exam, the questions there total 108 minutes. So again, look at the timelines for each question, watch your time carefully, and make that practice exam as close to the real thing as possible. And here is another question. Let me just pause so I can read it. There is a question about if someone fails the exam twice, what happens? You would need to then have a lot more study time before you would be able to be eligible to write the exam again. But my guess is I will be really, really surprised if anybody fails the exam twice. It's absolutely possible, but I think that because you've gone through the training and because so many of you have managed to get onto the webinar, you're clearly interested in the exam and you're trying to understand how to be prepared for it, my guess is that you're doing all the right things. And I'm very optimistic that you'll do well. In terms of the practice exam, what you will find in the study guide are all of the answers to the questions in that practice exam. And so you will be able to mark your practice exam and understand how many questions you got right or wrong in the multiple choice. And in the open-ended, so the multiple choice is either right or wrong. You'll be able to look at the answers and say, yes, I answered this correctly, or no, I didn't. And if you didn't answer it correctly, you'll want to spend some time looking at those questions so you really understand, how was it that I got that one wrong? What was it that I missed in that question? And with the open-ended questions, you'll take the opportunity to write your answers exactly as you would if you were taking the exam, and then look at the answers. And understand that with open-ended questions, there are different ways of expressing the answers. So you want to look at the answers in the study guide and say, well, how close did I come? Did I kind of talk about the same themes? Did I make the same key points? How much difference is there between what the study guide says is the best possible answer, and what I think is the best possible answer. So yes, you will have the correct answers for that practice exam. And someone typed that they heard that 80% of people fail the exam the first time. Not true. I honestly don't know what the pass-fail rate is, but I know for sure it's not as high as 80%. And yeah, someone has just said that they think it would be better to pass in Abu Dhabi. Yes, right on. Thumbs up to that one. It would be much, much better to pass the exam in Abu Dhabi. Partly because if you have to rewrite the exam in Canada, you're going to miss part of the study tour. So you're going to miss some of the fun. I mean, the study tour is going to be great. You're going to be out interacting with heads of all of these really interesting organizations, people who are just so passionate about service, people who are dealing with exactly the same kinds of service problems that you're dealing with. And the opportunity to interact with them is going to be really, really good. So sadly, those who do not pass the exam will have to miss some of the study tour. The agenda, the schedule for the study tour is still being worked out. And so I don't know exactly when during the study tour the exam rewrite will take place, but it will be a portion of the day from the study tour. But thank you so much, those of you who are posting questions to me. It's great to get some questions. Again, it feels so odd just for me to be talking at my computer at you all morning here. And so it's great to get some feedback and some questions coming from you. And my apologies, I should have advanced to this slide a moment ago because here's what I was just talking about. The answers to the practice exam are in the study guide, and you'll be able to mark each multiple choice question, and you'll be able to look at your answers for the open-ended questions and compare them to what's in the study guide. And the last point on this slide is you might find it helpful to, just after you've done the practice test, to talk to some of the other people who were in the training course. If there's areas where you had more difficulty, even getting together and having some little study groups might be useful if you find that there are certain areas that were a little bit more challenging for you. Someone has asked why the second exam couldn't be held in Abu Dhabi. The plan from the outset was that the rewrite would happen in Canada. So at this point, as far as I know, that's still the plan, and that's what's going to be happening, is that the rewrite for those who don't pass will be taking place in Canada. And this presentation, there was just a question if you can have a copy of this presentation. Absolutely. So Robert, can I ask that you would send a copy of this presentation out to everyone on the webinar? Is that possible? Well, I'm going to just make a note of that and make sure that you do get it. Sorry, I'm just writing again so I don't forget. But this information is also in the study guide. But I know that sometimes it's easier to just go back and review the actual slide. So we can either send it to Hamda and ask her to distribute it, or I know that Robert now has email addresses for all of you on the webinar, and so he might be able to just send it out to each of you directly. So I will follow up on that. Okay, and make sure that that gets. I just had a question. Will you be taking the exam in a group? My understanding is yes, that GSEC will be announcing the location, and you will all be required to be at that location on October 29th to write the exam. So stay tuned for more information from GSEC around how they're going to handle the exam administration. Okay, I think I've said a lot about this next slide already, and I think I've said a lot about it because it's just so important. Keeping a track of the time while you're writing the exam will be the make or break point for many of you. So don't let one difficult item eat up too much time. If you find that one question, either multiple choice or open-ended, if one question is slowing it all down and you're not going to get through it, move on. Make sure that you don't spend so much time on one question that's difficult that you fail to answer the questions that are easy. So just keep moving and use your rough paper, the note paper that you'll be provided. Make a note to yourself about questions you need to go back to. If it's a multiple choice question and you're stuck, guess and move on. You will not have any marks taken off for guessing. So you'll get 1 point if it's correct and no points if it's wrong. You will not get -1 point if it's wrong. I know I've taken exams where they took marks off when you guessed and you guessed wrong. That doesn't happen here. So if you're not sure, please guess, because there's 4 or 5 options on each of those multiple choice questions, so you have a chance. If you're guessing, you could still get it right. But do make a note of it for yourself of any questions that are a little difficult, and give yourself a little bit of time at the end. So there's 72 minutes for the 40 multiple choice questions. So I would want to try to complete all 40 multiple choice questions in less than 72 minutes, so that I do have a few extra minutes at the end to go back to any multiple choice questions that were a little difficult, so that I have a little extra time at the end to reflect on those a little bit more. And same with the open-ended questions. In total, they take 108 minutes. And for each question, it will say how many minutes to give to that question. So one question will say, give it 5 minutes. Another question will say, give it 12 minutes. So that they add up to 108 minutes. But remember, if you give each question all of the minutes that are indicated, you won't have any time at the end to come back to anything. So I would try to do every question using a little bit less time than is suggested, so that you have a little bit of review time at the end. And there's no advantage to finishing early. No extra points for being the first one out the door. No gold stars for being first this time. We were giving out some gold stars in the training room for people who came in on time. But that doesn't happen with the exam. You have to be there on time, and you can leave early if you're done. But don't just rush through, and try to get out the door first. If you finish early, I would suggest go back and read through it again and make sure that you've answered everything completely. All the people I've talked to who've taken the exam so far say that they really did need all 3 hours. So if you're done in 2, maybe you didn't give as much of an answer to everything as you should have. So go back and have a review. Another tip on managing your time is you may want to take a little break now and then. So when I'm writing an exam that's 3 hours, every 30 minutes, I'll just put my pen down, shake out my hands, let it relax, stretch, close my eyes, take a few deep breaths, have something to drink, have a candy, do all of those kinds of things for about a minute and then get going again. I know it takes time, but I find when I'm taking an exam, if I do those things about every 30 minutes, it helps me to be refreshed and keep going, and I think I perform better as a result. Now, a few tips, more specific things on the multiple choice, and then a few more specific things on the open-ended. So with the multiple choice, remember please that your task is to pick the best answer. And by best, I mean the answer that is the most correct. Here's the sneaky thing about exams. This one and many other exams. There may be more than one option in the multiple choice that is correct. But your job is to pick the most correct answer, the best answer. So you have to think about what each of the options means. What's the rationale for picking, the reason for picking each option? And look very carefully at all of the words in the question and all of the words that are underlined. Because, so again, those underlined words are a tip telling you which words are most important, and that will help you figure out what is the best answer. And just let me pause. Someone just said they thought the exam would be October 22nd, and that was originally the date. We did originally say the exam was October 22nd, but because of Eid and travel and all of the things that are happening in October, a decision was made for the exam to be on October 29th. So stay tuned for information on GSEC for October 29th for the person who just asked that question. Okay, so back to the multiple choice. So read each of the options really carefully and make sure you understand it. One of the things that I know I do, I'm my own worst enemy sometimes. I think I know the answer. I see something in the list of options that looks like the answer that I think is right, and I pick it and I move on. And in fact, I hadn't really considered all of the options, and there was something there that was an even better answer, and I should have picked it. Some people go through and eliminate each of them one by one, and some people say that it helps them if they keep asking themselves which of the options is the most complete answer to the question. That's another way of thinking about what's the best. What's the most complete answer to the question? And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people find it really helpful with multiple choice questions just to read the first part, the statement or the question, before you read any of the options. So read that very carefully, make sure you understand what the question is asking, and then figure out the answer. There's a lot of debate. Some people say, never ever change your answer if you go with your first answer on a multiple choice question, because if you change it, you're probably just second guessing yourself and you might be wrong. And in fact, I'm not sure that's right. It sometimes is right and it sometimes isn't. I think that if you go back and you have really good reasons for changing your answer, then go ahead and change your answer. But it's your job is to really carefully weigh the pros and cons of all of that. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're not sure, please do guess. It just breaks my heart when I hear that people didn't do well and they left a number of questions unanswered. Okay, let's zoom in on some of the material for the tips for the open-ended. So please read each question really, really carefully and make sure you understand what it's asking, and also understand exactly what kind of answer it's asking you to give. So in the exam, for example, you will find things that will say, list 3 points and explain them. So if it says list 3 things and explain them, make sure you do both of those. List the 3 things and explain each of the 3 things. This is an area where I sometimes see people doing not as well. It'll say list and explain, and they'll list the 3 and they'll forget to explain them, or they'll list 3 and they'll just give one general explanation that isn't clear enough to be an actual explanation of each of the 3. So whatever the question asks you to do exactly that and not more. Just do exactly that. So if the question asks you to just give a few points, bullets or point form, just do that. Don't waste your time writing tons and tons of text. So if they ask for bullet points, that means they're just looking for key phrases, key words. They're not looking for a long written response. But don't make the bullet points or even your written out responses so brief that you leave out important information. So that's your challenge, is to provide the right kind of information in the right way. And for each question, after you've read the question, before you start to write your answer, the best thing you can do is look at the exam booklet to see how they've laid out the space for you to respond. So an example of this, you will find some questions that will be like what I was just talking about. It'll be list 3 things and explain them. And the exam booklet might give you a little space where it says A, list the 3 things, and then more space where it says B, explain these things. So make sure you're putting your answer into the right spot in the exam booklet. So when you see an open-ended question, read the question, think about what it means, and then before you write anything, look ahead in your exam booklet and see how the exam booklet is laid out for you to provide your written response. I'm hoping that's clear. Again, if you have any questions as I'm going along, please do put them out in the chat box for me. So you have to present your answers really clearly and concisely, because the quality of your presentation does matter. And I said spelling doesn't matter, but if the marker can't read what you're trying to say, then that's where you'll lose points. And so for some of you, handwriting, I know for me, when I'm writing an exam, I have to be really careful with my handwriting, because I've gotten to the point where my handwriting is sometimes not clear enough. So someone has just asked if I can give an example of an open-ended item. I don't have one in the slides, so let me see if I can make one up on the spot. Okay, so here's one. And it might not be the world's best question because I'm making it up just on the spot. But a question could be something like, you have just been appointed as a manager of a service that is going to need to review the use of channels. So what are, as the manager for that service, what are the key things that you need to think about as part of your channel management strategy? Identify 3 key characteristics of channel management and explain how you would use each of those 3 aspects of channel management. So that's just a made up on the spot kind of question that is the kind of thing that the open-ended question asks you. So in that example, you're having to think back to the book, to all the material about channel management, and you'll have to think about all of the different factors that you think are important. If I was asked that question, the first thing I would do is I'd get a piece of paper and I would just make some quick notes and just write out everything I can think about really quickly as key aspects of channel management. And then the question said, identify 3. So then I'd look at my list and I'd think, well, what are the 3 that really make a difference? And what are 3 that I can really explain? Because I want to put myself in the best possible position. So I would pick 3 that I was really confident that were good answers. So I've got my 3, and I'd look, and probably the exam would say, list the 3 here. So I'd write down the 3 points, and then it would say, please explain these points. So then I would say point 1, and I would explain it. And then point 2, and I would explain it. Point 3, and I would explain it. And I would actually number them, 1, 2, and 3. And that's what this slide is saying. Present your answers clearly. So by numbering, I was asked for 3 things, and by numbering them 1, 2, and 3, I've helped the marker really clearly see that here are the 3 parts to my answer. So understand the question, make a few notes for yourself, think about what can you use from your knowledge in the best possible way to answer the question as clearly as you can, as completely as you can, and how can you put your answer down in a way that communicates as effectively as you possibly can to the marker what it is you're trying to say to them. Okay, we covered everything on slide 29. I get wound up with this stuff again. You guys know how I go. And I've been talking through, and actually I'm pretty sure I've covered all of the points on this slide. So we'll go on. So yes, at the end of the exam, do come back and make sure that you have reviewed your answers so that everything is there. You know, if the examples here, if an item asks for a diagram, make sure you've drawn a diagram. Make sure it's clear. Make sure the diagram is labeled. If an exam item asks for 3 things, make sure you've got 3. You know, if an exam item asks you to identify the benefits of something, make sure you zero in on clear benefits, you know, things that are an advantage, that are useful, that are good. So think about what the words mean. So what does benefit mean? Well, benefit means something good. So I have to make sure my answer is pulling out the very, very best points. If a question asks you to give 1 example, give 1 example. Don't give 2, because the marker's going to stop reading after 1. They're going to read your first example, and they're going to stop. So do exactly what the exam item calls for. Don't spend a lot of time adding lots of stuff, because that's not going to get you anything more. Okay, and just a few other tips. So the best thing you can do is make sure that you're in the best possible shape to write the exam on the 29th. Getting a good night's rest, arriving, as I said, early so you're not rushed, making sure you eat something before the exam. Excuse me. As soon as you get the exam and you're told that the time has started and you're allowed to open it, just do a quick walk through. Just look at all of the exam, just to make sure you get a feel for how everything is laid out and where everything is. What you'll find inside the exam is, for the open-ended questions, there are actually lines for you to write your answer down on. The back of every page of the exam is blank. So that blank page is there so that if your answer is longer than the markers thought, or the exam creators thought you would need to make it, that you have extra space. Some people write really big, and some people write really small. And the people who write really big may find that they do run out of space. And so you are allowed to write on the back of the pages, on the blank pages within the exam booklet. But you're not allowed to add any other pages to the exam booklet. The exam booklet is it. And the reason you're not allowed to add any other pages is because it's really easy for those pages to go missing, and then it gets to be a really difficult thing to make sure that all the papers are there and marked and not lost or not put with the wrong exam. So keep all of your answers in the exam booklet for the open-ended questions, and use the spaces provided. If you want to write on the back side of each page, you can. But if you're writing on the blank back side of the page, just at the bottom of the page, draw a little arrow or say see over or continue next page or something, just so that the marker knows that there is more and doesn't think that everything on that first page is it. In terms of working through the exam, you'll find the multiple choice questions first, and then you'll have the open-ended questions. A lot of people find that they like writing the multiple choice questions first because it kind of is a warm-up from just moving through a lot of content quickly. But some people like writing the open-ended questions first. It's your choice. It doesn't matter how you answer the test. All that matters is what you hand in at the end. Some people find that they like to write the multiple choice questions or the open-ended questions and do them all exactly as they are presented in order. Other people like to read through the exam and do the easy questions first. Some people like to read through the exam and do the difficult questions first. So you all have your own style for writing the exam. Just make sure that you answer all the questions. I've seen some people who have skipped around in the exam. They write an exam and they try to go through and just answer all the easy questions first. And then when they come back to do the more difficult questions, they accidentally miss some. So if you are skipping around, do make sure that you review and do a walkthrough to make sure you've answered all of the questions. Don't leave anything out, because you're walking away from points if you leave things out. So that was all of the material that I wanted to cover about the exam. And the other part of our webinar is to talk about any questions you have on the content of the block. But before we move to content of the block, I just want to pause and see if you have any more questions about the exam, because this is really our last opportunity to interact and for you to put forward questions about the exam. So I'm just going to wait a couple minutes and see if anyone types in any more questions. Okay, not getting any more questions. And so we will carry on. So now we get to move into the content. And I'm hoping you've had a chance to spend a little bit more time on the content since our training days, although I know that's a high expectation. We're back to that expectation delivery gap again, but I know that after the training you went back and you probably had inboxes that were close to exploding after being in training for 5 days and everybody wanting a piece of your time. So you probably haven't had a lot of time to study or to think about the training. But I would like to make sure we have this opportunity for you to put questions to me. Again, this is just to make sure that if there is anything, we can hammer it out now. So first of all, the first thing to look at is, do you have any questions from anything that's in the block? And on this slide, I've just listed out the 6 sections of the block. And just to remind you of all of the topics, boy, we covered a lot of ground in our 5 days of training. So I'm just going to pause and see if anyone has any questions. And it doesn't have to be a question. If there's a topic or a model or a concept or a word that you've looked at in the block or in any of the core references and you're just wondering, what is that? Or I'm not really clear on that, this is a great time to ask those questions. Okay, it might be a really short webinar. I'm not getting any questions at all. My next question was, how are you approaching your self-study time? So I'm hoping that you are putting aside a dedicated piece of time every day for study. And it would be good to talk to the person you report to and just explain how important it is for you to do the study, and that you will only succeed in the exam if you have some dedicated time for study. Again, I would suggest 1 or 2 hours a day, and I often find it can be really useful to be in touch with others during the study. I know a group of managers in Canada, actually a group of people in my province of British Columbia. There were a number of people who were getting ready to take the exam all at around the same time, and they got together online and spent some time talking about the exam and the content, and they made up little questions. They sampled what they thought might be exam questions. They made them up and would ask each other the questions. And what was interesting was when I talked to them after they took the exam, they said that the questions that they made up to ask each other were actually more difficult than the questions in the exam. So I think that's a great way to study, is to make up some questions and to study in groups. Okay, I'm getting a few questions now, so let me just pause and see what's come in here. Okay, so I've got, so far, the first one is, okay, so the focus on Citizens First and the other models and how it's related to Abu Dhabi. So I'm hoping that through the training, you were able to spend some time thinking about the models and how they apply to Abu Dhabi. And you'll see, if you go back through your slides, you will see that there are, throughout the slides, examples of good work from Abu Dhabi that illustrate the concepts. So, sorry, not GSEC, it was the Education Council, and the work that you saw there on the was part of a weekend homework assignment. That's a really good example of the SIPI, the Service Improvement Model. And if you were to look at that Education Council work very carefully, you would see all of the elements in the SIPI improvement model in that work. I think if you were to look at the, we had another example of Citizens Charter, where we looked at the work that has been done by the police in Abu Dhabi, and I think you can see parallels to what we talked about in the charters there. We had local examples of e-government and m-government and complaints management. So I'd have to go through and redo all 5 days to fully answer the question that asked if we could look at Citizens First and the other models and how they relate to Abu Dhabi. So I don't think we can do that in tonight's webinar, but if you have a specific model or a specific question from all the models and you're wondering how it applies, please do type that in so I can maybe better understand what information you're looking for. But as you're reading through the book, you'll see that there is a fair bit of information from Citizens First and taking care of business, and you are expected to understand that material. So, for example, both taking care of business and Citizens First identified key drivers. I don't know for sure if exactly the same key drivers would emerge in Abu Dhabi or not. You have to do the research in Abu Dhabi to find that out. Would they most likely be similar? I would say so. I would be really, really surprised, for example, if timeliness wasn't a driver. It might not be, but it probably would be. We talked about the key driver of access in Citizens First. Would access be important to people in Abu Dhabi? My guess is it probably would be. So even though you're studying Citizens First and taking care of business, which is surveys that were done in Canada, my guess is that those findings would be pretty close to what we would find in Abu Dhabi. There would definitely be some differences. But by studying the Canadian results, what you're doing is you're learning about the important concepts. So you're learning about the concepts of key drivers. You're learning about topics like the importance of privacy and security in public sector service delivery. You're learning about expectations and how important they are and all of those things. So I'm hoping, Trevor, that answers that question, but if not, write in some more, please. Oh, this is great. There's already a few people who have gotten together on the phone to talk about all of the content and to do some studies. So, yay, gold star for that one. And just let me take a moment and read what's in the box here. Okay, a question about the benefit of service standards to clients. Oh, okay, great question. Service standards are really important in communicating to clients or customers or whichever of those C words you want to use. So service standards, remember, they are public statements that explain the level of service that people will get. And when people are informed of the service standards, it shapes their expectations. So if we say nothing about the service standard, everyone will come with their own completely unique idea of what to expect. If we communicate the service standards, they may or may not like the service standard, but at least they know what to expect and they can plan around that. So, for example, we talked about driver's licenses and that we can have a service standard about the amount of time people have to wait in line when they come to renew a driver's license. And so if I'm the customer and I know that the service standard is a wait in line time of 5 minutes, for example, I can plan my day around how much time I need to give to going to get that service. So I know, okay, I have to wait in line for about 5 minutes and, well, probably take me, I don't know, I can guess how many minutes to complete the transaction. But that's a very different situation than if I had to wait in line for an hour or even more. I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but I know in Canada it sure did when the U.S. decided that everyone had to have a passport traveling between Canada and the U.S. All of a sudden, all sorts of people were getting passports that had never had them before, and we had wait lines of a couple hours for people getting passports. But so people needed to know that that's how long it was going to take, and then they can plan. So when we give information to customers through service standards, we shape their expectations, we help them to plan for getting the service, and by doing those things, we find that generally it's easier for them to be satisfied with the service. Again, if that's not quite a full enough answer, if you have more questions, please type into the chat box. And I just need to pause and read in the chat box a little bit more. Okay, another great question. The question is, can we consider service standard as a charter? Okay, so you know how we struggled with the language a little bit around citizen, customer, client, all of that stuff. We said, language gets used a little sloppy. Well, it gets used a little sloppy here as well. Quite often, you will see that what organizations do is they create a whole bunch of service standards, and then they glue them all together in one document, and they publish it, and they call it their charter. And other organizations will have a charter that lays out sort of a high level, the direction for the organization around service. It might have some service values. So say things like, service is important to us, we're continuously improving and all of those nice words, but it may or may not actually have any specific standards in it. So most commonly, the best way to think about this is to think about the service standard itself is the very specific promise. So the standard is how long is it going to take, how accurate is it going to be, all of those kinds of things. A standard is a very clear statement. It's a promise. It tells you exactly what to expect when you go to get the service on some particular element, so how many minutes as the example. A standard will also tell you what to do if the standard's not met. We call it the redress. Redress is R-E-D-R-E-S-S, the redress mechanism. So the standard tells you very clearly what to expect and what to do if the standard is not achieved. So not all charters contain all of that information, but some do. So there's not a really clear line between what is a charter and what is a standard, since some charters are made up of a whole lot of standards. But please do know that every standard is very specific. It lays out a measurable, something that the client or customer will actually be able to objectively determine if it's been achieved or not, and it has a redress mechanism. The benefit of service standards to the organization is that service standards communicate within the organization. So in the same way that a service standard benefits the public by communicating externally, it benefits the organization by communicating internally. When every employee understands what the service standards are for their organization, it's a lot easier for them to do their work because they know what's expected. It's really hard to get motivated and to do good work if you're not really clear on what's expected of you. But if you know that your organization has publicly promised a certain level of service and you're providing that service, then it's a lot clearer to you what you have to do. Service standards also benefit organizations by helping organizations have a clearer picture of the service requirements. And once you have a clear picture of the service requirements, it's easier to get a clearer picture of your resourcing requirements. So a clearer picture of what training do you have to do, what equipment do you have to have, and what changes you may have to make in your service. If you have a service standard, for example, that your wait in line will be no more than 10 minutes, and you measure and you realize that your wait in line is much more than that, then you know that that's an area where your organization needs to take corrective action. So the standard has helped you to identify that that's an area where you need to take corrective action. And as you're taking that corrective action, you'll be able to figure out do you need more resources? Do you need faster computers? You'll find out what it is that needs to be fixed. So I think service standards have a really clear benefit to the customer by communicating what to expect, by telling them what to do if the standard's not met. Standards have really clear benefits to organizations. And do you remember that one slide when we were talking about service standards? Guy was talking about service standards, but then I jumped in and did one slide. And it was a slide from a public sector, a municipal organization that I had worked with. And it was a slide that had a bubble in the middle and then 3 bubbles around it. And it was the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer of this regional government, had made this slide saying, when I set service standards, they are a public promise to my customers. They also communicate to my employees about what's important and what resourcing we need. And then the third bubble that we haven't talked about this morning is that the service standard also is useful for communication between the organization and the political level or the senior leadership level of the organization, because they have to understand as well that they have a requirement to resource the organization against those service standards. So go back and look at the handout from the day when we did service standards. and have a look at that slide with those bubbles to help answer this particular question. And I need to pause again and read another question. So, interesting question. The question reads, at which level in the organization should we have managers or leaders? Our customer service needs manager or leader if you are third party to deliver service. So I'm not sure I understand the second part of it. So if you want to write in some more, please do. But the first part of it, at what level in the organization should we have managers or leaders? Let me have a go at that, and then we'll see if I'm on the path that you were hoping to hear about. So we talked about both service managers and the competencies and the requirements of service managers. And we talked about managers as being involved in planning and budgeting and administration and all of those things. And then we talked about service leaders and talked about them as setting direction, being inspirational. I think, Jasmine, I think you brought that word in when we were talking about service leadership. And so it's, we made a distinction between service managers and service leaders. And we tend in organizations to use these labels formally. So we'll have a position that is a service manager, and then we'll have a position that's a leader. And that's useful because that brings some clarity as to who's focusing mainly on what. But in truth, the most successful organizations are those that say that they want elements of service leadership to be in place at every single level within their organization. So even the most frontline level person will see that they have a role to play in being inspirational and trying to help the organization achieve its vision and move forward in the right directions. And that means that every employee who embraces some leadership element would be willing to come forward with ideas, with suggestions for improvement, identification of opportunities for the organization. So we want to have leaders, formal leaders, but we also want informally to have an element of leadership at every level of the organization, because that's when the organization really can become a great place to work. But again, I'm not entirely sure if that was the question that was being asked, so feel free to type in some more on that one in particular if I missed it. And I'm just going to check my box again. Okay, so that's all of the questions that I've had so far on the content. Any other questions? Again, I'm just going to pause for a moment in case anything comes to mind, because, again, it is our last chance to have this kind of chat before you write the exam. Okay, well, then we are way ahead of schedule, but we're at the end of all of the content I wanted to cover with you this morning. I'm so delighted that I will have an opportunity to see you all again in person in early November in Canada, and I'm hoping that you're excited about the trip. It's a really long trip, so I do hope that you will get there in time to have get there Friday night so that you do have the Saturday. I traveled home this week on Wednesday, got home Wednesday night, and wow, I really needed the Thursday. I'm still kind of not sure I'm back in this time zone yet. And someone has asked if anything else comes to mind, would it be okay to drop me an email? Please do, but let me just give you a little word of warning. I'm leaving tomorrow on vacation, and we'll be back in my office on October 20th. And while I'm on vacation, I will be looking at my emails, so I will certainly respond to you, but It might not be at the same service standard that I normally have. I usually try to get back to emails really quickly because I know when people pose questions, they are looking for an answer quickly. But I have to confess that with my 2-week vacation, I might not be quite as quick in responding as I would normally be. But as I said when I handed out my business card to you on the last day, the reason I wanted you to have my business card is that you can ask me questions now anytime. And I enjoy staying in touch with the people who have been in my various training sessions over time. So I will be delighted to hear from you as you prepare for the exam or at other points down the road as you're into managing service and you have questions and we can be in touch. Let's do it. So unless there's any last questions, I'm just going to pause one more time just to see if there's anything else coming in. Okay. Well, thank you for the various comments and questions, and thank you for hanging in there. We didn't go 3 hours. We went 2 hours instead. But it's hard to just sit and listen to a computer talking at you for 2 hours. So I really appreciate the fact that you've managed to hang in there with me this morning, and we've been able to cover this ground. I hope you're feeling a little bit better about the exam, and that your studies go really well. And inshallah, I will see you all in November Sunday the 3rd it is, in Ottawa. And I wish you all safe travels and a good time writing the exam. Take care.